Hello, Adult Bible Study Leader. I am recording this in the kindergarten room of First Baptist Church at Whitehall. This is where my wife teaches Sunday school every week. And just about every week, the kindergartners have a snack. And this week, I've brought my own snack. It's a nice, juicy, sweet grape. But have you ever taken a grape you thought was going to be nice and sweet, and you bite into it? And when you do, it's not sweet, it's sour, and it makes your face pucker up. It even makes your teeth feel a little bit funny. Believe it or not, that's the basis for our Sunday school lesson this week. We're going to be in Ezekiel chapter 18, looking at another characteristic of God, and that is God is just. There was a saying back in the days of Ezekiel and Jeremiah, and that saying was, the fathers eat sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. It's kind of an odd saying. We're going to see what that means, because I think it's really important, especially in this lesson, to know what is the background of our Sunday school lesson. It really makes the few verses, I think there's 7 verses in this week's lesson, it'll make those verses really come alive, and you will understand them better if you know exactly what was going on in the culture at that time. So both Ezekiel and Jeremiah are prophets. They're both preaching about the same time. They're both preaching to the country of Judah and warning them of the destruction that's going to come of them if they don't repent. I'm going to start in verse 1 of chapter 18. It says, "The word of the Lord came to me. What do you people mean by quoting this proverb about the land of Israel? The fathers eat sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge." Here is the meaning of that popular saying during that time. The Israelites were looking for an excuse for them being punished. And they were saying that because of the sins of previous generations, my father, grandfather, great-great-great-great-great-grandparents, their sins I'm being punished for. Meaning, the father eats the sour grapes, and as a result, the children's teeth are set on edge. That's what that meant. They were making an excuse for their own sins. However, both Ezekiel and Jeremiah both preached individual responsibility. And so that's what he's combating here in chapter 18. And what they were basically saying, the children of Israel, was God is not just. He's not fair. Because of all the bad things our ancestors did, we're getting punished for it. And that's just not right. That's the background of today's Sunday school lesson. Now, another important item to know is that, especially in Old Testament theology, righteousness does not equate with salvation. We're talking about a righteous person in the Old Testament. We're looking at somebody who really strived to keep God's law. And it was based on that conditional covenant that we see in Deuteronomy chapter 18. Conditional covenant there. We see in the first 14 verses, the positive side. If you do these things, God says, then I will do these things for you. You do these good things, I will do these good things. And then the last verses 15 through 68, over 50 verses, say if you don't do these things, or if you do these things that I'm telling you not to do, then here are the bad things that are going to happen to you. That's the negative side. So if you did your best to try to keep those commands, you were considered to be righteous. So it's important to note that in this passage in Ezekiel, when we're looking at righteousness, we're not looking at salvation. And as we look through chapter 18, before we get to our actual text, we see Ezekiel tells this story. And it's coming, of course, from the Lord. And the story is, suppose that there's a righteous man, and he does the things that I have commanded him to do. And then he has a son, and the son is an evil son. And we see that quite a bit in the history of Israel and Judah's kings. You'll have a very good king, and then he'll have a son who won't follow the ways of the Lord, and he'll go his own way. And so that might be the background of which Ezekiel's talking here. So you've got a good guy, let's call him the good guy, and he has a son who's who does the bad things. He's an evil person. In Ezekiel 18, the Lord is saying that just because the guy has a good father doesn't mean that I'm going to impute that goodness down to the evil son. He is responsible for his own actions. And then the story goes on, and then we say we've got the evil son, and he has a son who's a good son. So now we've got the grandson of the original good father. Just because this evil guy has done so many bad things and done all the things I told him not to do, I'm not going to impute that punishment down onto his good son. That's not the way it works. It's an individual responsibility. So that's the background of where we're getting to in our Sunday school lesson. It's important to know, however, that there are consequences, and that being a good parent and being a godly parent will probably have a good effect on the child. Now, we know that's not always the case. I can think of several examples of good, godly parents who have children who have turned out to be pretty much pagans. And then the opposite's also true. You can have children who are raised in very poor environments, and I don't mean monetarily poor, but spiritually poor environments, and they turn out to be very strong Christians. But generally speaking, if I do good as a parent, if I'm a godly parent, that's going to have some positive consequences on my children. And then also the opposite is true as well. Also, let's take into consideration if I'm a parent and I commit robbery and then I go to jail. I'm being punished for that. My family is not being punished for that. However, there are consequences for my family. I have a loss of income. They're not able to live up to that lifestyle to which they have become accustomed. But it also, especially as a minister, it's going to affect my church as well. There's that rippling effect. So yes, there are consequences that go with our actions, and they flow to other people. But those other people are not necessarily being punished for my actions. Let's also look at the last verse in our text today. It's in verse 32. It says, "For I take no pleasure in the death of anyone, declares the sovereign Lord. Repent and live." God says, I don't take any pleasure. I don't get any enjoyment out of punishment. I know as parents, we have probably said that to our children. This is going to hurt me more than it hurts you. And as the child, they're thinking, yeah, right. But we know that as a parent, it hurts us to have to punish our children. And I think that's what God is saying here. He takes no delight in punishment of his children. So that's a good thing to note, to tell your class. So as you go through the lesson, remember that we're not talking about salvation, losing salvation. He's talking in an Old Testament context here about blessings and curses. So keep that in mind. We tend to look at this through a New Testament theology of salvation, and that's not what Ezekiel's talking about here. So that's important to note. So let's remember this week. God is just. He does not punish the children for the sins of the father. Like we said, there are consequences sometimes, but it's not punishment. Let's also think about our own character. We're looking here at Judah and their sins and how they have to be individually responsible. Let's take that a little personally to our own personal lives. How can the way people perceive me, which is actually my reputation, and then I've got my character, who I actually am, those things need to be really in line. They need to be the same. And too often we project a reputation, and people perceive us to be much better than we actually are. Because our character is what? The character is who we are when nobody's looking. That's usually a lot different than the way people perceive us. So it's an individual responsibility. We should try to get that matched as much as we can through God's help, of course. Well, that's all I've got for this week. I hope you have a good Sunday school lesson this week, and I will be back next week. Bye.